0800 hours local time. Davis Strait, 47 nautical miles southwest of Greenland. The gray sky above the icy North Atlantic was torn apart by the roar of twin turbofan engines as 42 Rafale M fighters screamed toward the most heavily defended airspace in the Western Hemisphere. Below them, cutting through pack ice and 3-foot swells, the French Navy's nuclear-powered aircraft carrier Charles de Gaulle led a battle group that had no business being where it was, deep inside what Washington considered sovereign American waters. This wasn't a training exercise. This wasn't a diplomatic misunderstanding. This was French President Emmanuel Macron sending a $4 billion message. Wrapped in 42,000 tons of nuclear-powered steel, Europe would not be dictated to. Greenland's future would not be decided in Washington alone. And if America wanted to claim the Arctic, they'd have to go through France first. The U.S. Second Fleet's response was immediate and overwhelming. The USS Gerald R. Ford, America's newest supercarrier, went to general quarters within minutes of detecting the French formation. Escorting destroyers charged forward at flank speed. EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft launched from the Ford's deck, their jamming pods painting the entire region with electromagnetic chaos. Two NATO allies, theoretically bound by Article 5 mutual defense, were now on a collision course that could shatter the Western Alliance. But what looked like an unprecedented crisis between Washington and Paris was actually something far more sophisticated. A trap so elaborate that its real target, lurking 400 feet below the surface, 80 miles to the northeast, had no idea they were walking into a carefully choreographed ambush that would reshape Arctic power dynamics for the next decade. The Russian Northern Fleet was about to learn that modern warfare isn't one with missiles. It's one with theater. 6 days earlier, Élysée Palace, Paris. The meeting lasted 17 minutes. No staff, no transcripts, no official record. Just 3 people in a secure conference room: Emmanuel Macron, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, and the commander of U.S. Naval Forces Europe. What they discussed wouldn't leak for years, but the outcome was immediate. Within 48 hours, French naval forces began what Paris publicly called unscheduled Arctic sovereignty patrols, what Washington privately called Operation Misdirection. The geopolitical cover story was perfect. Macron had been openly critical of Trump's renewed push to purchase Greenland from Denmark. French media had amplified the narrative that Washington was acting unilaterally, ignoring European interests in Arctic governance. Public opinion in Paris was primed. The French public would absolutely believe their president would send a carrier strike group to assert European influence. The Russians would believe it too, and that belief would be their undoing. Day 3, Northern Fleet Headquarters, Severomorsk. Admiral Konstantin Petrov studied the satellite imagery with growing satisfaction. The French carrier battle group was precisely where GLONASS tracking said it would be, steaming directly toward the Davis Strait, making no attempt at stealth, broadcasting its position like a peacock displaying feathers. To Petrov, this was a gift from God. NATO fracturing over Greenland, the Americans and French on the brink of confrontation, and in that chaos, an opportunity that Russian naval planners had been waiting 2 decades to exploit. He gave the order. 2 Yasen-M class nuclear attack submarines, the Kazan and Novosibirsk, would depart their patrol stations immediately. Their mission: exploit the NATO infighting to slip through the GI-UK gap, Greenland-Iceland-UK, undetected and penetrate deep into the Atlantic. These weren't ordinary submarines. The Yasen-M class represented Russia's most advanced underwater technology. Pump jet propulsion instead of traditional propellers. Anechoic coating that absorbed active sonar pulses. Acoustic signatures so minimal that NATO classified them as effectively undetectable during normal operations. Each submarine carried 16 Zircon hypersonic cruise missiles, Mach 9 weapons that could reach Washington in under 7 minutes from launch positions in the North Atlantic. Placing these boats off the U.S. eastern seaboard would fundamentally alter the strategic calculus of any future confrontation. Petrov knew the Americans monitored Russian submarine movements obsessively. But during a crisis, with French and American warships actively pinging each other with high-powered sonar, with electronic warfare jamming creating massive acoustic and electromagnetic confusion, the chaos would be perfect cover. The Yasen-M boats could slip through while everyone was watching the surface drama. He transmitted the operational order through encrypted channels. Within 6 hours, Both submarines departed Gadzevo Naval Base and disappeared into the Barents Sea, exactly as U.S. naval intelligence knew they would. Day 4, 0600 hours. Aboard USS Gerald R. Ford, Captain Jennifer Rodriguez studied the tactical display in the carrier's Combat Direction Center. Blue icons representing friendly forces, red icons for the French battle group, and two orange contacts, classified signals intelligence indicating Russian submarine movement from the Barents Sea. She keyed the internal communications system. Tau, Captain. Confirmed Sidewinder package is ready for deployment. The tactical action officer responded immediately. Sidewinder ready. Transport standing by. Sidewinder wasn't a missile system. It was 15 people. Specifically, 15 members of Naval Special Warfare Development Group, SEAL Team 6, cross-trained in underwater acoustic warfare. They'd spent the last 4 days aboard the Ford, reviewing ice penetration techniques and acoustic sensor deployment protocols. Their mission was simple on paper: be inserted via helicopter onto ice floes along the Russian submarine's projected transit route, drill through the ice, deploy ultrasensitive hydrophone arrays connected via encrypted satellite uplink to the 2nd Fleet's ASW Coordination Center, create an underwater tripwire so sensitive it could hear a wrench drop at 50 miles. The insertion was scheduled for midnight. The French confrontation would reach its peak 6 hours later, drawing maximum Russian attention. By the time Moscow realized they'd been baited, the trap would already be sprung. Rodriguez allowed herself a thin smile. This operation was elegant in its deception. The Russians thought they were exploiting NATO chaos. In reality, NATO was exploiting Russian opportunism. Day 5, 1,200 hours, Charles de Gaulle Carrier Strike Group. The French battle group made no effort at stealth. The Charles de Gaulle's PAMS fire control radar operated at maximum power, continuously scanning Greenland's southern coast. Rafale fighters conducted aggressive combat air patrols, deliberately flying close to NORAD early warning stations. The Frem-class frigates escorting the carrier activated their active sonar systems, pounding the seafloor with acoustic energy. To any observer, Russian satellites, neutral intelligence services, civilian shipping, this looked like a force preparing for confrontation. What nobody outside the operation understood was that every aggressive maneuver had been choreographed weeks in advance. The French weren't preparing to fight the Americans. They were creating the world's most elaborate acoustic smokescreen. Modern submarines face a constant challenge: noise discipline. Every pump, every machinery vibration, every water flow creates sound. At slow speeds in deep water, advanced submarines can minimize these signatures to near background levels. But at high speed? During aggressive maneuvering? The acoustic signature grows exponentially. The Russian Yasen-M boats were quiet, exceptionally quiet by any standard. But if they tried to exploit this crisis by rushing through the GIUK gap at high speed, they'd generate detectable sound. The French active sonar created perfect cover for that noise. Or so the Russians believed. Day 5, 2,300 hours, ice floe Charlie 7. The MH-60S helicopter hovered 50 feet above the ice pack, downwash from its rotors creating a blizzard of snow and ice crystals. 15 figures fast roped down into the darkness, landing on ice that groaned and shifted beneath them. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb checked his team's positions via encrypted radio. All 15 SEALs accounted for. Equipment intact. Ice conditions stable enough for drilling operations. They worked in 3 teams of 5. Each team moved to a pre-designated position, spread across 6 miles of ice along the projected Russian transit corridor. Portable drilling rigs, designed for Arctic oil exploration, repurposed for naval warfare, bit into the ice. 3 feet. 6 feet. 9 feet. Down to open water. Into each hole went an UQS-48 hydrophone array, civilian maritime research equipment modified with military-grade signal processing and satellite uplink capability. Each sensor could detect acoustic signatures across multiple frequency ranges simultaneously, processing sound data in real time and transmitting via encrypted channels to the Ford's ASW center. By 0200 hours, all 15 sensors were deployed and operational. The underwater tripwire was live. Chief Webb transmitted the mission complete signal. Then his team settled into concealed positions on the ice to wait. If the Russians came through this corridor at speed, the sensors would hear them. And if the sensors heard them, the game was over. Day 6, 0800 hours, aboard Russian submarine Kazan. Captain First Rank Dmitry Volkov studied the passive sonar display with satisfaction. The chaos above was even worse than intelligence had predicted. Active sonar pulses from multiple French and American warships. High-speed surface traffic. Electronic warfare jamming creating massive electromagnetic interference. His sonar operators couldn't hear anything clearly beyond 5 miles. But that worked both ways. If he couldn't hear clearly, neither could the Americans. He ordered an increase to 20 knots, recklessly fast for a submarine trying to remain undetected, but necessary to exploit the window. The Kazan and her sister boat Novosibirsk had to transit the GIUK gap while the Americans were distracted. Every hour they delayed increased the risk that the surface crisis would resolve and NATO's full ASW attention would return to hunting Russian submarines. At 20 knots, the Kazan's pump-jet propulsion generated a distinct acoustic signature. Quiet by conventional submarine standards, but detectable to sufficiently sensitive equipment at close range. Equipment like 15 hydrophones deployed directly in his path. Day 6, 0830 hours, USS Gerald or Fort Combat Direction Center. The acoustic alert flashed across multiple displays simultaneously. Contact Sierra 1. Submerged. Bearing 047. Range 23 nautical miles. Speed 20 knots. Acoustic signature consistent with Russian Yasen-M class nuclear attack submarine. 4 minutes later, contact Sierra 2. Bearing 051. Range 26 nautical miles. Speed 19 knots. Same classification. Both contacts were moving at high speed through the hydrophone field. Their pump jets were generating detectable sound, not loud, but clear enough for the sensitive arrays to classify with confidence. Captain Rodriguez keyed fleet communications. All units, this is Alpha Whiskey. Sidewinder package has contact on 2 Sierra targets. Coordinates being uploaded now. Execute Phase 2. Phase 2, the revelation. At exactly 0845 hours, the entire character of the crisis changed. On the Link 16 tactical data network connecting all NATO forces in the region, the French carrier battle group's encrypted frequency suddenly synchronized completely with U.S. Second Fleet's Naval Integrated Fire Control System. The confrontation ended in an instant. No negotiation, no stand-down, no diplomatic resolution. One moment, French and American warships were postured aggressively against each other. The next moment, they were operating as a perfectly coordinated hunter-killer group. 3 Arleigh-Burke-class destroyers and 2 French Frem frigates turned in unison, their bows swinging to point directly at the positions of the Russian submarines. They'd been tracking the contacts via secure data link for the last 15 minutes, maintaining their confrontation theater while maneuvering into optimal firing positions. At 0847, all 5 ships activated their hull-mounted active sonar systems at maximum power, focusing directly on the Russian submarines' positions from multiple angles. The acoustic assault was devastating. Active sonar pulses measuring 240 decibels, roughly equivalent to standing next to a rocket engine, converged on the Kazan and Novosibirsk from 5 different directions simultaneously. The sound waves didn't just detect the submarines. They physically rattled their hulls. Russian sailors clutched their heads as the piercing sound penetrated their pressure hulls despite acoustic insulation. Inside the Kazan, electronics designed to detect faint acoustic signals were overwhelmed by input overload. Sonar displays whited out. Passive sensors went into automatic shutdown to prevent permanent damage. The submarine was effectively deaf and blind, surrounded by enemies broadcasting their exact positions. 0850 hours, the final humiliation. A P-8A Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft, which had been orbiting at 25,000 feet pretending to monitor the U.S.-French confrontation, suddenly dove toward the surface. At 400 feet altitude, its weapons bay doors opened. 4 objects dropped into the water in rapid succession. They looked like torpedoes. They moved like torpedoes. They generated the exact acoustic signature of Mk-54 lightweight torpedoes, the U.S. Navy's primary anti-submarine weapon. They were training versions, inert warheads, programmed for non-lethal terminal approach. But the Russian submarines had no way to know that. All Captain Volkov knew was that 4 torpedoes were now actively homing on his boat. His sonar operators, just recovering from the active sonar assault, reported multiple inbound threats, closing at high speed. Acoustic signature consistent with Mk-54. He had seconds to make a decision. Dive deeper and hope to evade? The training torpedoes would follow. They were programmed to launch countermeasures that would only confirm his position to every ASW asset in the region. Fire weapons in self-defense that would turn this into actual combat with unpredictable escalation. There was only one option that wouldn't result in his submarine being destroyed or starting World War III. Emergency blow! The order came out strangled. All ballast tanks. Surface the boat. High-pressure air screamed into the Kazan's ballast tanks. The submarine angled sharply upward. Russian sailors grabbed handholds as the deck tilted 15 degrees. 90 seconds later, the Kazan broke the surface amid white water and ice, completely exposed to every sensor and camera in the region. 3 miles to the northeast, the Novosibirsk executed the same humiliating procedure. 2 of Russia's most advanced submarines, designed to be virtually undetectable, forced to surface by a combination of active sonar assault and training torpedoes, photographed from multiple angles by P-8 Poseidon aircraft and satellite reconnaissance. Every secret about their acoustic signature, the crown jewel of Russian submarine design, was now recorded in NATO databases. The cost analysis. Russia expended 2 Yasen-M class submarines on operational deployment. Each boat costs approximately $1. $6 billion to construct. Annual operational cost, $85 million per submarine. Mission cost including fuel, crew, and support, approximately $4. $2 million. But the real cost was strategic. The acoustic signature data collected by the 15-man SEAL team and the coordinated active sonar assault gave NATO a complete profile of the Yasen-M class under various operating conditions. From this day forward, these submarines would no longer be effectively undetectable. They were now tracked targets. The deterrent value of Russia's most advanced submarine class had been neutralized by 15 men on ice and some repurposed civilian acoustic sensors. U.S.-French coalition expenditure, the entire operation, SEAL team deployment, hydrophone arrays, training torpedoes, fuel for the confrontation theater, cost approximately $8. $3 million. Return on investment, neutralizing a multi-billion-dollar strategic threat without firing a single live weapon. The final twist. 3 days after the Russian submarines limped back to Severomorsk in disgrace, commercial satellite imagery revealed something extraordinary. The French carrier battle group that Russia had seen on radar and tracked via satellite, the formation that had drawn so much attention, had never actually included the Charles de Gaulle at all. The nuclear carrier had been in Toulon Naval Base the entire time, undergoing scheduled maintenance. The carrier strike group detected by Russian intelligence consisted of 2 Danish support vessels modified with radar reflectors to mimic a carrier's signature, electronic warfare decoys broadcasting false emissions, carefully timed cyber intrusions into commercial satellite feeds to insert fabricated imagery. The actual French contribution, 2 Frem frigates and 15 special operations soldiers. Russia had mobilized 2 Yasen-M class submarines, their most valuable strategic assets, to exploit a NATO crisis that didn't exist, to transit through a corridor that was wired for their detection, to escape a confrontation that was coordinated theater. They'd been defeated by 15 men on ice, some hydrophones, and the most elaborate deception operation since World War II. Strategic implications. In Moscow, Admiral Petrov faced a career-ending investigation. How had Russian intelligence failed to detect that the French carrier wasn't actually deployed? How had 2 Yasen-M boats, designed to be undetectable, been forced to surface by training weapons? The answers were uncomfortable. Commercial satellite imagery could be spoofed. Radar signatures could be faked. And no matter how quiet your submarine, if you accelerate to 20 knots through a corridor lined with hydrophones, you're going to be heard. In Washington, the operation was classified at the highest level. Publicly, there had been no crisis. No French confrontation. No Russian submarines detected and humiliated. Officially, nothing had happened in the Davis Strait that week. Unofficially, every Russian submarine commander now knew that NATO's ASW capabilities were far more sophisticated than they believed. Every Russian naval planner understood that chaos in NATO might be exactly the kind of coordinated deception designed to lure them into making mistakes. And every Western ally understood that when the US and France wanted to send a message, they didn't need to fire shots. They needed to write a script so convincing that the enemy cast themselves as the villains. The Arctic is closed. Greenland remains Danish territory. Though US military presence has expanded significantly, the Arctic approaches are now monitored by acoustic arrays that even NATO members don't know the full extent of. And Russian submarine commanders have new standing orders when NATO appears to be fighting among themselves. Assume it's theater and stay home. The Davis Strait engagement that never officially happened rewrote the rules of modern naval warfare. Victory doesn't go to whoever fires first.